Noelle Sélevy woke to total darkness, for she was blind. It was impossible for her to place herself in the void. Physically, she was horizontal, and there was a shoulder in her belly. If there had been anything in her stomach, she'd have chucked it up. Noelle had been huffed over one side of somebody strong, and every other step felt like a full-force sucker punch to the gut. Whoever it was had a tight grasp on the back of her boiler suit, which kept her secure, made her feel as though she was fleeing the danger rather than being dragged into it. Fleeing who, though? With who? Jesus. The back of her head felt all hollow. Part of her sought information in the deepest recesses of her mind, but all she found were moth-tuned thoughts and flashing images of her own shaggy green hair. So she'd not been born this way. It had happened to her at some point, and in response to this trauma, she'd been outfitted with this heavy, ring-shaped half-mask, which lay clamped over the bridge of her nose and the lobes of her ears. It was pressurized, perhaps computerized. Had she not been helpless in the arms of her captors, she might have been able to remove it. Not that it would have made a difference. She could very well feel that she had no eyes. They were missing. She could hear something strange, like the stretched ringing of synthetic bells. 3 interwoven tones, 3 straight lines that seemed to go on forever. It wasn't an alarm. It was inside her head. And the more that she focused on it, the less sick she felt overall. That is, until she was slung to solid concrete like a sack of shit. No matter how loud they seemed to be, the chimes within her mind could not drown out the sound of steel slicing through the skeletal system. Without making so much as a grunt, Noelle's captor took out 4 of their pursuers at once. Adrenaline and exhaustion rolled off them in the form of smog, and the fumes choked a hock of spit from Noelle's throat. This plausible savior, possible dammer, apologized to Noelle for dropping her, and revealed herself to be a woman named Satogaeri, though this was no time for introductions. "Are you awake?" she'd said. "Don't rush yourself." It was hard to say from the sound of her voice, but Saigō was probably middle-aged. Experience clung to her words, as did a quaffable kindness offered in a situation undeserving of such pleasantries. It asked for fear. It called for stress. And yet, considering there was a force of 30, maybe 40 footmen encroaching on their position, Noelle felt nothing of the sort. Fight or flight should have shuttled through her veins, and yet some part of her continued to tick back over to the idea that it would simply work out well for this band of total strangers, despite the fact that she knew they'd come to a dead end. Noelle's recovery began with a pins and needles sensation in her fingertips and toes, and with what little energy she'd accumulated from the floor, she attempted to stand, but she couldn't do a damn thing. "Careful," said Saigō. "Believe it or not, but you've been asleep for months. It'll come back, but you have to be patient," she paused. "It's all part of the process." "What process?" Her blood, like lead, sat dense and motionless in her veins. Her limbs were waterlogged timber. Her head was awash with a rushing noise. A thought amongst the tones asked if she'd like to play dead, and another further back told her off for even considering such a charade. "Alright folks, seems thin enough to me," called another cocky voice. It must have belonged to a young man who'd almost certainly just knocked the hard part of his head against an impenetrable steel wall. It did not fill Noelle with confidence, and it did not give her hope. "Don't look at me like that," said the voice. "It's gotta be a way out, don't you think?" "I think." "Okay, whatever. I'll give it a go, eh? Can you hold the baby?" Did she hear that correctly? She did. Baby made 4 of them altogether. So why could Noelle feel more than 6 pairs of eyes on her? Pain, which shot from the back of her thighs right up to the back of her spine, signaled the return of her ability to stand. It wasn't easy. In fact, it hurt more than she had the vocabulary to describe. Seemingly, her senses had come back first, and her mental faculties would follow. "Where we?" she asked shakily, and to nobody in particular. Either one of them could have said something, or even given the wrong answer, and she'd have been okay with that. But all 3 of them left the dead air to just hang there, as though Noelle had made the noise by accident. Doubling down, she attempted to wrap her lips around another sentence. What's happening?" she asked. What's going on? She went on, her mind constructing a fourth and final question, though her lips felt far too foolish to speak it out loud. Why aren't I scared? Don't you worry, said the man, slapping his hand against the wall. We're getting out of this goddamn place, love. Come on, Sharon. Let's show her what we've got, eh? It did not need to be said that Noelle could not see this man. Sure, she could presume that he was muscular because the barricade before them had recoiled at his touch, and she could assume that he was short based on his desire to yell everything that he said. But she could not put a face to his voice, not even in her mind's eye. She could not even pull a face from the doubtless countless years that she'd experienced before this very moment. Instead, the void in which she found herself in became occupied by the wild sparks of her imagination crackling under pressure. As this man focused himself in his worldly energies, she could feel the presence of another being in the room. Air parted at the strange beat of leather wings, and the rattle of snake talk played percussion beneath his actions. It was him, yes, but there was something else within the confines of his corporeal form, a second soul, intertwined and in perfect sync. It wasn't just him. She could detect the same twinned radiance emanating from Saigō, and the child, too. A benevolent and enormous force surrounded them all, influencing them, enhancing them. And she had one too. She could feel it. It had something to do with those noises in her head, those 3 straight lines. She could feel one of them bending just slightly as the man changed something tangible about the world. With his hand still flat against the malleable steel, the man let loose a primal scream. The metal cracked, the foundation shook, and by his will, the barrier began to break apart from the middle. Doing so expended a sheer amount of physical energy, so much so he turned the air hot. In that moment, this other presence she'd felt, the one he'd named Sharon, ate up his entire being and allowed him to reorganize the very atoms in his reach. And when he was finished, the bending line unkinked and flattened back out. Escape from wherever she may have been held did not seem like much of an option for Noelle, not in this state. She was standing, sure, but she was also swaying. She couldn't run, needless to say, so the man with the god hands demonstrated further depth in his unusual abilities. From his uniform, he tore a strip of fabric and, with little to no effort at all, changed it into a length of rope. He tied it around her waist through the belt loops of the boiler suit and introduced himself as Mick Strings, King of Things, before doing the same around his own waist. Like this, Mick would drag Noelle onto hard stone, across tarmac, up through dirt, and into the woodland, before the friction burn finally set in and the discomfort forced her to stand. As it happened, she was rather durable, very sturdy indeed, and when her skin did break, any wounds would close themselves, if left alone or forgotten about. Hell, before she could even stand up, the abrasions pulled together and slapped closed. No scars, no injuries discernible by touch, at least. Mick was apologetic, not because she'd gotten scratched, but because she thought he had to stop. I could keep going, he kept telling her. He hadn't even gotten started, apparently. Only problem was that they'd have to stop once an hour for Mick to replace the rope. 60 minutes was the upper limit for the King of Things. Saigō confirmed that they would no longer need to run. For now, at least, they had put a fair jaunt between themselves and what they affectionately referred to as the Cambion factory. Here, the air tasted cleaner, but it still felt room temperature. It was like she was piloting her own form, only half experiencing the natural. She found that she wasn't listening for birds, and she wasn't listening for bugs. She was listening for helicopters, and was pleased to hear none. That's it then, she said in her first full sentence. This time, she aimed for Saigō, who seemed less inclined to crack a joke. We're not being chased, are we? No more soldiers? Believe it or not, said Saigō, in a soft voice and a straight-to-the-point manner. We are the soldiers. Actually, deserters was probably more apt by this point. Drafted members of a personal legion, hand-fit with a secondary sentience, a paranormal presence, not unlike a poltergeist, able to imbue soldiers with unfathomable abilities. This sentience was known to all as a remnant, a piece of humankind lost ages prior to the acceptance of free will. Long story short, said Mick, they've put a fucking ghost in your brain that'll let you do some real cool shit in exchange for you doing some real dark shit for them. Like, well, I can make anything out of anything as long as I start out with something. Oh, and I'm dead strong. Bugsy Malone here, by which he was presumably referring to Saigō. If she makes direct eye contact, she can read your goddamn mind. I guess you're immune, though. Noelle tutted, and they all fell silent for a bit. It sort of felt like Saigō was shooting him a look, maybe to say, I don't like that nickname, or stop swearing in front of the baby. When she turned the question to herself, the silence did not waver. She might have heard a shrug, or her mind might have been playing tricks. Either way, they did not know, and that meant Noelle had not been rescued to serve a purpose. So nobody's coming after us then? I wouldn't say that, said Saigō. Thing is, said Mick, they make things like us at that Cambion factory, but it's staffed with fellas that are just fellas. Salarymen, white-collar guys, hired goons. I mean, they're not coming all the way out here. They'd get slaughtered. And that's not just me being boastful. So, she said, we're safe? Mick almost stifled his laugh, more like he just caught it on the way out with both his hands, and still it slipped through the cracks between his fingers. Eventually it beat him, and he had to catch his breath. Oh, absolutely not. It's just, well, there are soldiers out here that we can't outrun, and they all know exactly where we're going. Can't? Repeated Noelle to a resounding, oh no! It's not that we can't. There's nothing I can't do. But what I mean to say is, he explained, we're gonna have to kill them or they'll keep coming. Got a name and everything too. Call themselves Gatherers. And they're just like us, so be prepared to get your ass handed to you. Saigō continued after him. Believe it or not, but there will be a no-kill order on us. They'll want to collect us, preferably without harming us at all. Still, if we're what they're keeping locked up, then the Gatherers are the contingency just in case. In case this happens, finished Mick, referring to their party of near strangers. By now, word's gotten round to all 56 Gatherers, so the closest one will do the deed. You're going to want to be armed, Noelle. I think it would be better than nothing, if I'm honest with you. I concur, declared the King of Things as he tore off another strip of cloth. Against all sense, cloth became steel. It's a sword. Swing wildly and away from yourself, he told her, placing it in her left hand. It didn't do much for her confidence, to be honest. He made one for himself, and then another for Saigō, who swatted at the air only once before telling him that the weight was off. It's a sword, he repeated. Obviously, the heavier, the better. What do you think, Noelle? At the risk of pissing him off, Noelle asked for a gun or something from this century, but the two of them just shrugged her off and broke into a chuckle. A gun? Said Mick, whose laugh was distinctively heartier and more believable. You're having me on. You can't have a gun, you melon. They've all got impact shields. Oh, excuse me, said Noelle in something of a reactive tone. Exactly how long have I been asleep? What is this, the future? It was general knowledge, she was told. Designed sometime in the late 21st century even, which was ages ago. There was this lunatic private military way back when, and they went on to demand an international ceasefire in favor of unifying against greater, more powerful threats. A difficult proposition, of course, but the company had an impressive bargaining chip. A portable force field system known as Foxygen. It was intended to be worn on the wrists and the ankles and would project at a constant rate. It was able to successfully repel projectiles with little to no immediate or lasting damage to the user, unlike bulletproof vests. It was undeniably impressive, and in return for the consideration of their demands, it became a standard issue item. It has remained as such long after the attributed creator passed on to the next world, believing their awarded ceasefire would last indefinitely. As Mick explained it, it ain't gonna stop a car crashing into you, but the smaller, the faster the impact is, the better the shield reacts to it. You get a sword, love, he said, and like the rest of us, you become the car crash.
Alright. Are we about done here, folks?
Called a sing-song voice, stepping into focus. Hard to tell exactly who was speaking, as the voice had been disguised by a modulator worn over the mouth. Could have been going through a loudspeaker, maybe through a protective mask. Hell, maybe a mask was part of their uniform. Noelle hadn't thought to ask. A gatherer had arrived to collect them. Another Cambion, one of 50-something. Jesus, what the fuck had she done to deserve this? In came the whisper, the voice inside her head, which sat only beside the one that's usually there. That remnant of something once lost told her not to panic. And because of that, she couldn't. Not that she didn't, but she physically couldn't. All she could manage was to turn to face yet another pair of souls. The opposing forces conjured warped thoughts of squirming claustrophobia. The sound of hoofs and pointed feathers trumpeted the arrival of a powerful foe, and certainly one that confidently knew their own ability.
Well. The gluttony, the pride, and the reject. How long till they grow back, Noelle? Or are your buddies just gonna keep dragging you from place to place?
Oi, called Mick. Don't heckle her, she's blind. What threat could she be?
She's holding a sword, Mick.
Yelled their opponent.
Honestly, what do you think you're doing running off with that baby, Saigō? Where are you running to? You gonna swim to the mainland, you fucking lunatics? You've all got bright green hair. Where could you possibly hide from the director?
Fuck the director, shouted Mick. And fuck the father too.
I don't work for the father, asshole. I work for the mother, and she wants you dead. She just hasn't put the paperwork through yet, so count yourselves very lucky.
God's sake, Ace, he snapped. I was speaking bloody generally. His snark came off with a scoff, but Mick was not to be trifled with. In that instant, he shot off from the ground straight towards his opponent. His immediate acceleration caused a momentary change in the air pressure again, which pushed Noelle to the dirt. Still, it was over before she could even put her head back up from the ground. Mick had been knocked clean out of the air. All it took, Ace, the gatherer, was a single swipe. Mick hadn't even landed a blow. The earth had shaken as a result of his movements, and now his remnant had flatlined. Ace kicked his limp body over.
Still breathing,
they reported.
He's not usually this careless, is he?
Noelle began crawling backward in retreat. She'd realized something. She'd realized that Mick had known he'd lose the fight, though he might have thought he'd last a little bit longer. As soon as he'd recognized which gatherer they'd gotten, it was game over. He knew her by name, for God's sakes. Noelle did not stop when she realized this, nor did she stop when she realized that she would certainly go no further than this. After all, everybody was looking for them, right? How far could she get if she didn't know where the hell she was in the first place? That song in her head was so loud now. She'd hoped that those 3 straight lines might have led in a positive direction, but they'd done no such thing. Ace approached, but Saigō strode forth to meet her, both armed and holding the infant. Overheard, as she passed Noelle's cowering crawl, Saigō appeared to be telling the baby to look her in the eyes. "Nyoro," she said. "Let me see." Nyoro must have been the child's name. It had a nice ring to it, Noelle thought, in a moment of uneasy clarity. She wondered if it meant something. Her brain must have been short-circuiting because she'd stopped moving to think about it. Then, there was an impact and Saigō managed to stay standing afterwards. She'd preempted the movement and blocked it with just one free arm. How? Noelle just waited in awe, her jaw to the floor. Once Saigō had switched on, something clicked within Noelle. Instinctively, she could tell the difference in strength between her and Mick was staggering. It was strange, almost like a sixth sense that let her differentiate these vibrations in the air. At first, it had just been the shadow of these aforementioned presences that she'd felt, but now, all of a sudden, it had become second nature, almost passive. Noelle could feel nearly every movement made by Ace, or Saigō, or Nyoro, simply by the ripples their remnants sent out. It told her something else too. It told her the secret to Saigō's strength was Nyoro. See, Nyoro was a Cambion too, just like the rest of them. Of course she was. She was probably the reason they'd escaped, come to think of it. But from what Noelle could make out, Saigō, Mick, and Ace shared an equal partition of their individual bodies with the creatures. In short, they worked in synchronicity with each other to achieve their miracles. But Nyoro, what consciousness does an infant have? Noelle could only detect the remnant. Saigō had said, "Look me in the eyes." If she could read minds, as Mick had so aptly put it, then that would give her access to 2 remnants at once. But what did that mean, anyway? From where Noelle was sat, frozen stiff, it seemed that both Saigō and Ace were on even footing, and no, Saigō was only making defensive motions, and the fight was drawing a step closer with each block. Where was the voice in her head? Where was Noelle's remnant? Was this it? Supernatural tinnitus? That's what she got in the trade-off for this nightmare reality? No false godhood, no laser beams, no spectral sword, just crashing waves of sound. Just 3 straight lines. No, was one of them bending? A different one now. The bottom one this time. It wasn't long until Saigō was struck down too, kicking up the dust as she landed at Noelle's feet. Now Ace was but a step or 2 away, so close that Noelle could nearly tell what form her remnant had taken within her. Ace smelled of old leather, sweat, and burnt hair. Her breathing was steady through the mask, and there was something like tentacles surrounding her now, though Noelle could not tell whether these were imagined or not. The noises in her own head, well, they were getting too loud now, too loud. It was beginning to cover up reality like a fog. Was it shielding her from witnessing her own untimely death? It swarmed and superseded her voice, her breathing, everything. Noelle waited, and she waited, and eventually the 2 remaining straight lines tapered off and dissipated. She could just hear their ringing beneath the louder, bent bottom line. She wasn't dead, was she? Unless this was death. Noelle could feel a new kind of wind, which had absolutely no temperature. As she breathed it in, particles of sand coated the back of her throat. She felt no need to cough them out. In fact, not breathing at all felt right here. Here. Ace wasn't wherever here was, and neither was Saigō, or Mick, or Neuro. There was somebody, though. Not an unfamiliar presence at all. Not calming, but trustworthy, at least in the sense that this someone, something, did not want her dead. It was something. It was a cat. Well, not a cat, per se. It was just in the shape of a cat. For one, it was now entirely surrounded by those noises that she'd had in her head. Like a thick miasma, it slunk along tiptoe footsteps in the empty space around her. This, she knew by feel alone, was her remnant.
Be not afraid, Noelle Sélevy. You will not be harmed here.
The cat spoke in a half voice which manifested amongst the frequencies like musical notes atop a stave.
You are host to Byleth, fourthborn to Beelzebub. Together we are one. You were built for me, and yet, when you woke, you rejected the visage of the universal machinations, and you rejected me.
I don't remember that, she said. I don't remember that at all.
It will come back to you,
said Byleth.
When you choose to fight. Until then, we must prepare.
We must, Noelle repeated. We, yes, they were we, weren't they? She could feel it. Byleth was purring in her company. They both felt comfortable, even lost here. How did we get here? Where are we? She felt Byleth lay itself down on the dirt of this new world beside her, and so she knelt too. There was nothing there, though, when she reached down to pet them. Might have been inappropriate anyway. It spoke again, in that same calming voice.
This indigo reality that we occupy consists of 3 spinning plates of existence. There is your world, where the universal engine sits at the perfect center of the universe. There is the world above it, on which the expired rely, and there is the one below it, stretched and skewed like a shadow.
As if to mock the spirit, Noelle pretended to survey the location. The ladder, then, is it?
Yes,
said the cat with no change in tone.
This is the filter plate. Mere centuries before your birth, Noelle, humankind was naught but a tame and stationary fuel source under the thumb of the world above your own. After a predetermined period of lifetime, mortal souls were harvested and deposited in the universal engine. In the process, all that was deemed unusable by the engine or unclean by the fide was delegated to the filter. A metaphysical slurry dropped from a great height into this world,
they explained.
Beelzebub, our All-Mother, was born from the resulting negative build-up, and thus came we, the remnants of the human soul.
You're just gonna skip over the whole people of fuel thing then, said Noelle.
We can discuss it, if it would help you,
said the cat.
But it is no longer the truth of the matter. The Fide are long gone, and their home repurposed by a new god.
Let's start with here, shall we? She suggested. Did you bring me here?
No,
Said Byleth.
I simply allow it to happen. This is what we can do. I am the witness to the strings which hold reality together. I could have shown you the gears which turn the plates themselves. With my abilities, we could go anywhere we please, Noelle.
No need to be bitter about it, she said, kicking the dirt at her feet. Byleth continued.
My gift has always been ocular, but I have spent much time pondering whilst you have been asleep. It will take patience, Noelle, and you will need time to adapt, but if you are willing to listen,
Said the cat.
I can teach you how to pull apart the sounds around you, and you will return with the ability to survive for as long as you deem necessary.
You have been listening to Pinball, Measure 1, Prelude, written and directed by Jake Lucy. This production is copyright 2021 by the Sleepy Bones Detective Agency. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is purely coincidental. If you'd like to support the show, please visit us at patreon.com/SBDA. Please visit us on the web at sleepybones.agency for more surreal stories.